You're lying in bed, phone propped against a pillow, watching day 5 of rain streak down your window. Your group chat's gone quiet. Your streaming queue is empty. You've already reorganized a drawer you don't even care about, twice, purely out of boredom. Now picture that same rain falling thousands of years earlier, hammering a rocky overhang on the coast of what's now South Africa. No phone. No drawer to reorganize. Just you, your family, and a fire that has to survive the next several days no matter what happens outside. For early humans living through weeks of seasonal rain, this wasn't a mild inconvenience. It was one of the most dangerous stretches of the year. It was also, strangely, one of the most important. Something happened during these long, wet, boxed-in stretches that historians didn't expect to find, buried in the dirt for tens of thousands of years, still intact. What were they actually doing in there for days on end with nowhere to go? The first problem was never food. It was heat. Fire has to be fed constantly, and constant rain makes dry fuel almost impossible to find. A single family fire can burn through an entire day's worth of gathered wood in a matter of hours, which meant days of stockpiling were required before a single day of downpour even began. Ancient shelter dwellers solved this the same way you handle a phone at 2% battery before a long trip. They hoarded reserves before the storm hit, stacking dry wood, bark, and fat-soaked bone deep inside the cave where the weather couldn't touch it. Ash layers excavated at sites like Sibudu Cave in South Africa sit stacked on top of each other year after year in the exact same spot, meaning one fire was tended, banked, and restarted again and again through entire rainy seasons. But keeping a fire burning inside an enclosed cave for days created a second problem nobody had solved yet. Smoke has nowhere to go. A dry, closed shelter during a storm turns into a lung, punishing haze within hours if nothing changes. So early humans got specific. They learned which wood burned cleaner. They positioned fires near natural vents. They figured out exactly how deep into a shelter they could sit before the smoke became worse than the rain outside. This is environmental engineering, done with no metal tools and no written instructions, just repetition, memory, and getting it wrong enough times to finally get it right. Here's the question that should be sitting in the back of your mind. If you can't hunt, can't forage far from camp, and can't risk a river crossing that's turned into a flood, what do you actually eat for a week straight? The answer isn't glamorous, but it's the entire reason some of these groups survived long, wet seasons at all. Researchers have found evidence of stored fat, dried meat, and root vegetables cached specifically ahead of bad weather, alongside shellfish gathered in bulk right before a storm rolled in. Ancient humans were, in effect, meal prepping for the apocalypse, just on a smaller and far more immediate scale than you're picturing. Except stored food creates its own problem when the air turns damp for days on end. Dried meat and cached tubers are only useful if they stay dry, and a leaking shelter in a weeks-long downpour is exactly the kind of place where stored food goes moldy fast. So there was a third layer to this. Meat wasn't just dried once and forgotten. It was smoked over the same fire that was already being carefully rationed, then rechecked, re-dried, and repositioned to the driest, highest ledge inside the shelter. Every solution created a new, small chore. And every chore had to fit around a fire that could not go out and a family that could not leave. For a long time, the assumption among historians was simple. Forced shelter time was dead time. Waiting, surviving, nothing more. A pause button on a difficult life with nothing worth studying once the rain finally broke. Then researchers started looking more closely at what was actually left behind in these layers of cave floor, and the assumption didn't hold up at all. At Sibudu Cave, archaeologist Lynn Wadley and her team uncovered something that shouldn't exist if people were simply hunkering down and waiting out the rain. Layers of bedding made from woven sedge and rush, dated to roughly 77,000 years ago, folded in with the crushed leaves of a tree known to repel mosquitoes, not randomly gathered plants. A chosen one for a chosen purpose, assembled during time that was supposedly wasted. The same site tells an even stranger story below the bedding layers. Researchers studying stone tool residue at Sibutu found evidence of compound adhesives, sticky mixtures of plant gum, ochre, and rendered fat used to glue stone blades onto wooden handles. Making this glue is not a 5-minute job. It requires careful heating, precise ratios, and enough patience to fail several times before getting it right. That kind of multi-step trial and error project is exactly the sort of thing that needs long, uninterrupted stretches of time indoors to actually happen. Boredom, it turns out, might be the real villain of this story. Not because it's dangerous, but because of what people do to escape it. Trapped together for days with nothing to hunt, nowhere to wander, and no forward motion, hands still needed something to do. And what filled that gap wasn't just sleep. Roughly 200 kilometers along the same coastline, at Blombos Cave, researcher Christopher Henshelwood and his team found something else entirely. Ochre processing kits, abalone shells used to mix pigment, dated to around 100,000 years ago. Alongside them, shell beads, deliberately pierced and strung, each one showing the exact same wear pattern you'd expect from being threaded and worn against skin for weeks at a time, in the same handful of positions, on nearly every shell recovered from the layer. This is not survival behavior. This is decoration. Identity. The kind of thing you only have the mental and physical space to invent when you are not currently being chased, hunted, or starving. Some researchers believe this same forced downtime pattern helps set the stage for something even bigger, some of the earliest known cave art, created not during hunts or migrations, but during the long stretches when moving outside simply wasn't an option. Somewhere, a rain-soaked family 100,000 years ago was doing the Ice Age version of doom scrolling. Except instead of a phone, they had a shell, a sharp rock, and way too much time on their hands. None of this required leaving the shelter. All of it required exactly the one resource a bad storm was forcing on everyone anyway, time with nothing else to spend it on. There's a piece of this story most people have never heard, and it isn't about creativity. It's about what close quarters do to people who can't leave. Weeks of enforced closeness, no privacy, and dwindling food should, in theory, produce conflict. Sometimes it did. Researchers studying skeletal remains from long-term shelter sites have found healed fractures consistent with occasional violence between individuals, the kind of tension close quarters and rationed food can create in any group, ancient or modern. But what shows up far more consistently in the record is the opposite, shared tool-making. Cooperative food processing. Evidence of injured or sick individuals being cared for, sometimes for months, rather than left behind. The groups that made it through the wettest, most confined stretches weren't simply the toughest. They were the ones who got better, not worse, at getting along. This is where the picture flips. We didn't just endure the rain, we used it. Forced stillness gave early humans something hunting and gathering never could, which was uninterrupted hours to notice, experiment, and refine. The bedding wasn't just bedding. The beads weren't just decoration. They were proof that idle time, the exact kind you now feel guilty about, might be one of the oldest engines of human intelligence. Every rainy season became, without anyone intending it, a kind of ancient workshop. Not because anyone chose it, because the sky left no other option. Across the world, other groups facing their own version of this standoff arrived at strikingly similar answers. Neanderthal shelters in what's now Spain show the same pattern of hearths rebuilt in the identical spot over and over across generations, suggesting entire family lines returned to the same dry corner of the same cave every single rainy season for longer than any modern nation has existed. Different continent, different species of human even. Same solution to the same sky. Look at what happens to modern humans during enforced isolation, and the pattern hasn't gone anywhere. Long stretches of forced indoor time, whether from bad weather, illness, or a global lockdown, tend to produce two very different outcomes depending on the group. A spike in tension and conflict, or a spike in hobbies, art, and connection. Sourdough starters. Balcony concerts. A group chat that quietly turns into a support system instead of a place to complain about the weather. Search interest in baking, crafts, and home hobbies spiked worldwide during the longest lockdown stretches. The exact same instinct showing up tens of thousands of years apart, just with different tools. The same fork in the road our ancestors faced in a cave with a fire that could not, under any circumstances, go out. Consider the scale here for a second. A single rainy week feels endless to you, stuck refreshing a weather app that's already told you everything it knows. Early humans faced this exact standoff with the sky not once, but every rainy season, for generation after generation, for over 100,000 years before anyone wrote a single word down. And in some of these coastal regions, a single wet season could run for a month or more without a real break, meaning the single week you're imagining was often just the opening act. That is not 1 week of forced creativity. That is thousands of weeks, compounding quietly into the foundation of symbolic thought itself. You still sigh when a package gets delayed by the weather. You still feel mildly wronged when the Wi-Fi flickers during a storm. You still treat a canceled plan like a small personal insult when the storm outside is nothing at all compared to what it used to mean. Somewhere along the way, the rain stopped being a threat and became an inconvenience. And in trading one for the other, we quietly lost the version of ourselves that once turned a week of nowhere to go into the reason we have art, ornament, and each other at all.